In a world gone mad, only rationality and common sense can save it. It's Andrew and Jerry Save the World with your hosts, Andrew Langer and Jerry Rogers. And now, here's Andrew and Jerry.
Well, hey there, everybody. Welcome to another episode of Andrew and Jerry Save the World. Episode 51, Andrew and Jerry Take Down the UFOs. I'm Andrew Langer.
Jerry Rogers.
And we are back at our own remote studios today, not in the studios of the Heritage Foundation. I want to say once again, Jerry, I want to say thank you to John Pop and the good folks of the Heritage Foundation. They could not have been more gracious in their hosting. We had a lot of fun there. I had a lot of fun there. I think you did as well.
Oh yeah, and I so enjoy John Pop's presence. He's just a good guy.
He's a professional's professional, and the fact that he did have the dinger in his office was just fantastic. So it's been a week, and obviously this is why you and I had a lengthy discussion last week, and I think you made some excellent points regarding the Chinese balloon. No sooner had that podcast been put in the can, then all of a sudden we start just shooting down stuff in the air. By the way, Jerry, how do you pronounce the word NORAD?
NORAD?
NORAD, right? You and I both watched war games when we were kids. We know that NORAD is NORAD. I heard a young reporter on NBC, and I was trying to find the clip and I couldn't. A young reporter from NBC pronounce it NORAD.
Again, there you go. That's the state of journalism.
Yes, it is
today. It's absolutely ridiculous. Where you have, it's very similar. It's funny, how issues conflate. The public school system. I'm gonna bring it back. I promise.
There you go. Okay, all right.
The public school system in this country is failed. Recent headlines from Baltimore City about over, tens of thousands, 93,000 children can't do reading or math proficiently.
Right.
23 schools testing, not one student tested at grade level. I mean, it's crisis.
Right.
And the political leadership will not take responsibility. But part of the problem is, and I'll make the connection to journalism, is that the public school system is captured by the educational establishment. So if you want to teach, you have to be licensed, and you have to be registered, and you have to have a teaching degree of some sort. And that creates a captured class of work and system. And unfortunately, many of these teachers or many of these individuals, they want to change the world. And they're woke and they're progressive, and so they go and they get their degree in education. This is why we have a failed system. If you are expert in algebra, math, English, history, you should be able to take a proficiency test. If you have a BA or a master's degree in a topic, you should be able to teach public school in that topic.
Sure.
Similarly, in media, people go to journalism school, so-called journalism school, or get degrees in journalism because they want to change the world, and they're not expert in anything. And this is the problem.
But here's the problem, right? And I'm going to also tie these two things together. We had a fundamental change in our education system, and again, I would say probably around 30 years ago. So around the time you and I were in college. Now, it used to be that you would use young education, elementary and secondary education, to teach kids about the world and to teach kids how to do things, right? How to do math, how to read, things of that nature. And then you would go to college, and college was supposed to teach you how to think. But running through all of this is supposed to be some kind of promotion of intellectual curiosity. You were supposed to be a curious kid. And if you were a curious kid, that was supposed to be rewarded. Right? We wanted kids to think about things and think about the why of things. But the problem with agendaizing in schools and propagandizing and indoctrination is that when you indoctrinate, you're not teaching people to be curious. In fact, you're teaching them to be just the opposite. You are teaching them, and you are in fact punishing them when they are intellectually curious. So you're absolutely correct, right? You know, someone who was the product of, and I don't know if this reporter is the product of public schools or private schools or what have you, but but she is the product of an environment in which people are not intellectually curious anymore. Again, something you and I have talked about. I was talking to a friend of ours last week, in fact, about this as well. You know, you and I spent a lot of time talking about the grifter class and specific people who are allowed to stay within political movements, even though there are folks who know. There's a lot of debate going on about a whole bunch of folks in the grifter class right now in conservative circles. And I made this point to our friend that this is, again, people are not intellectually curious. They don't do the work anymore. They're not willing to vet. They just sort of go along. And so it allows the grifters. We've gotten very, very far afield here, Jerry, of where
I know.
We want to go.
And the bottom line on this is that, and we see this now in survey after survey, you have groups like Minding the Campus and other groups, the American Mind, Law and Liberty. There's a host of intellectual factories, think tanks that are doing research on this. And the fact is, children from elementary school to high school, but then young adults in university tell these researchers and these surveys they are afraid to speak their mind. They are afraid to ask questions. And again, this is because we have this that we have politicized. We have injected diversity, equity, inclusion, religiosity into the education system and into back to where we started, into journalism.
You know, I'm hoping that someone is going to do research. You and I, again, we did a whole show a couple of weeks ago about diversity and the impact of diversity. And we talked about this, and I've talked about this at length over the years, about something I recognized when I was a teenager, which is that when you highlight the difference in people, right, and you make it all about the differences in people, you serve to divide them. We now have this study, Jerry, that among adolescent women, there is an epidemic of anxiety and depression.
Yes,
and I'm wondering if some of this has to do with trauma, but the anxiety and depression. I'm wondering whether or not this has to do with this idea of separating people out, and you know, again, then some of it, of course, has to do with social media and the emphasis on the number of likes that something gets. But sorry, go ahead.
But again, that goes to the broader issue where we are objectifying. And we are separating our lives from this idea of truth. Yeah. Again, the Washington Post, of all places, and the New York Times have covered this story about women in terms of the anxiety and stress. A lot of this is the result of the very policies and propaganda that the New York Times and the Washington Post promote.
That's what I'm saying.
There's also, again, it's up at Real Clear Policy today, and that is women are again, in these private surveys, and there's these groups at Harvard University, a think tank called Populous, doing research in terms of what people will admit to privately, but the opposite when they are asked publicly.
The Bradley effect,
right? And it's turning out that young girls. Young girls, I mean, high school age girls, are being forced into sexual relationships, literally being forced, engaging in intimacy they're not ready for. And a lot of this has to do with the impact of Hollywood, of pornography, of the reign of relativism. Well, we really do have a sick culture.
There was this essay that a woman wrote a few months back about that very issue. Someone who was a longtime feminist leftist, probably an intersectionalist, I don't remember, but sort of talking about the idea of, you know, there was this whole pushback against the concept of slut shaming. And she felt over all of these years of sexual experimentation, which was supposed to be empowering to her, she just felt debased and degraded. You know, it's the other part
because we have stigmatized stigma.
Yes.
Now, yes. I'm not saying that we should never forgive. There's not redemption, that people make mistakes. But the fact of the matter is, we're teaching young girls we're imprinting on them this wrong idea that they should be expressing themselves this way.
I don't know.
And this is empowering.
I don't know. I think some of this has existed in the wake of the 1960s. There was a lot of this,
of course,
that was coming out. But I think it has been weaponized now because of the internet and social media.
And there was also pushback from segments of culture.
Well,
that
sure.
doesn't look. I mean,
that's the issue. That's the central issue. Is that the folks who had pushed back on that have been demonized and ostracized and otherized for so many years and made to be ridiculed. You look at all you have to do, right? All you have to do is look at the evolution of programming on MTV from 1981 to 2023, and you can see how this has changed.
My wife, Erica, and this is going back now years, when she was at Fordham University, she did a paper once addressing this issue. And this is back in the 90s. And essentially the paper was, we've gone from the Beatles, I Want to Hold Your Hand, to I Want Your Sex.
Yes. Well,
and
that was in college, right? Because that was the big thing. Yes.
Right. And again, this goes back to these larger cultural issues. I know we want to get back to these objects being shot from the air, but again, the issue, even with these balloons or objects, UFOs being shot down, the problem here again is a problem of journalism and transparency.
Yes.
The president is being remarkably obtuse about this and non-transparent about it. And I understand if there's national security issues.
Well, it gets into what you and I again we're talking about with the Chinese balloon, but go ahead.
Right.
Yeah.
But now we're getting reports that we're just shooting stuff down. That in fact these might be U.S. weather mechanisms in the sky, and that's the problem. When you have misinformation or you have conflicting information, it is the responsibility of the White House, of our political leadership, to bring some kind of clarity. You don't have to be completely naked in terms of what you reveal, but there needs to be some transparency and some information given to the American people.
By the way, what's interesting in this is as we talk about the evolution of stories and the evolution of narratives, there was the narrative in the wake of, it was in the weekend between when the balloon was really spotted by civilians and the story became a big news story, and when it was finally shot down on that Sunday off the coast of Myrtle Beach. And you remember the story was, well, all of these things happened under the Trump administration, and the Trump administration didn't do anything about it. But
again, what? Interesting you say that, because we don't know if that's true or not.
Well, no. But here's what we do now know, Jerry. We now know is that yes, they were launching things, but our equipment wasn't detecting it. It wasn't something that the Trump administration did, but it was just the way that our equipment was. So
let me understand. Let me wrap my head around this. So we're saying in February of 2023. That when these flying objects, these balloons, these spy balloons were being flown over the U.S., say 4, 5, 6, 7 years ago, that we had no capacity, no means by which to detect them.
Well, I'm not saying that we had no means, but it's like something. Hunt for Red October was on this morning,
right? But how do we know that's true?
Well, honey. That's what I get to. I talk to Jerry so much that every once in a while I'll call him.
Oh, come on, dear.
How do we know that that's true? We know, Jerry. We don't. All I know is what's being reported.
But why?
But hold on. Let me make my point, though.
But why would we say that? Why would the Pentagon admit that? It makes no sense.
Because they're scrambling for narratives. My point in all of this is that at the immediate reaction was the whataboutism. And I want to talk about equivalent.
Well, ding. That's the reason why they said this.
Yes.
Not because it's true. It may be true, it may not be true, but they were trying to deflect, which goes to our larger point.
But originally, here's my point, Jerry. So originally they were trying to deflect. Then they finally had to admit, well, we just didn't know. We didn't know what they were. Our equipment was saying that it was something else, right? Because a slow moving object at that level is it's not something that they're necessarily looking for.
I know.
They're looking for.
I'm
right,
sorry,
because,
but there's something unbelievable. It smacks of being untruthful.
Okay, but think about this.
When the Pentagon says that, well, we knew it was there, we didn't know what it was,
but we didn't go and look at it. But
yes,
but my point is, but Jerry, again, sort of going back to 1986 and Matthias Rust flying a Cessna 172 and landing it in Red Square and getting through the entire Soviet defense network, was hard to believe, and yet it happened. And so
because he flew under the radar,
right? But yes, but the thing is, that's what I'm saying, is that when you're not looking for a Cessna 172, when you're looking for heat signatures and launch signatures,
I get your point.
That's what I'm saying. I mean, one would think that in the almost 40 years since Matthias Rust, we would, in the United States of America and at NORAD, have a better capability of seeing these things.
Right. But here's my pushback. And
yes.
That is, if we missed it in the past, if we could not decipher, if we did not engage, if we did not attempt to investigate, the Pentagon, whoever is released, if that's true,
right,
and the Pentagon is publicly admitting to that, then whoever is running the Pentagon should be fired immediately. Why would you let our enemy know? Why would you let our enemy know? Oh, by the way, we did not detect these things.
Again, never attribute to malice. That can just as easily be attributed to stupidity. I mean, and we are seeing stupidity up and down right now with all of this. I mean, I got audio of Joe Biden I can play. I mean, anyway, this is what's interesting to me. Just I want to focus on the story itself and the shoot downs over the weekend, and the bizarre fact that the Pentagon held a press conference. I guess it's not bizarre. I think it gets to our point that the Pentagon held a press conference during the Super Bowl about this. There is nobody, Jerry, who was doing any kind of an artist's rendition, a sketch of the things that got shot down between Friday and Tuesday, which I find fascinating. I'm trying to go online to see if anybody has any kind of concept as to what it is that they might have shot down. We're all making jokes. I made my Harry Potter's flying car that was shot down over Alaska. And yet nobody is talking about what it might be. I mean, they're saying what it isn't. Go ahead.
I think this whole episode goes to our larger point that we make almost every program, and that is that the news media is nothing but a propaganda arm of the progressive movement of the Democratic Party. And the fact of the matter is that the Biden administration is caught on its heels. The Pentagon has made the issue worse. Look, there's a front page story at Politico where our vice president says that, these spying objects in no way impacts our relationship with China. What?
Well, okay, but I see again. I have a feeling that just nobody's briefed Kamala Harris on this.
But we're so concerned with genitalia and with transgenderism and equity politics and queer theory that here is a function, national security, and the Biden administration is ill prepared. It goes to again. Yes. The big conversation, at least we had, and some on the right have had, where you have this very suspicious train derailment with noxious chemical fumes, and it's one of several derailments of late.
Right,
and Pete Buttigieg, who's the Secretary of Transportation, is at a forum, and he's literally talking about how there are too many white men in construction. Meanwhile, there is this calamity, this disaster in Ohio, and it looks like there might be some something going on with these attacks on our infrastructure. But yet the person who is charged with this is talking about equity politics and racial theory and all the rest of the progressive nonsense. We are being led by children. I think folks with the mentality of children.
Listen, I think, and I'm going to say this tongue in cheek, but I think I need to start bringing over some kind of a tinfoil hat, to put on as I start talking about conspiracy theories, just to try to lighten up the mood a little bit. But let's talk about what you're talking about, Jerry, which is, let's tie a bunch of things together. We have had at least one incursion by a Chinese spy balloon. By the way, we now know that it was definitely a spy balloon because it was launched from Hainan Island, which is not a scientific research facility, but a military facility. We know that it was being tracked from its launch. So we know that that's going on there. We know that there have been a spate of mysterious fires at various food processing plants, both, by the way, meat and eggs, part of why those things have spiked. We now have this train derailment in Ohio. We have these other train derailments elsewhere. At the same time, right? We've got, anyway, so to me, we cannot take these things, and to your point, we cannot take these things just in a vacuum of governmental incompetence on the part of the Biden administration. We have to take it into the fact of our enemies know that the Biden administration is incompetent. Therefore, it gives them license to engage in all kinds of malfeasance. Now, I'm not saying that all of these are attacks on American soil by our enemies. What I'm saying is that they both illustrate the vulnerabilities that we have and very much could be attacks on various vulnerable points within American society.
Let me say this, and I'm going to go 30,000 feet just so.
Right at the level, Jerry, between one cylindrical object and the octagonal object got shot down.
The enemies of the United States, yes. China, Iran, Russia. These are serious efforts, and these nations aren't engaged in the cultural issues, the gender issues, the race issues, that seems to have the entire American elite class preoccupied.
Hysterical.
Right? Whether it's corporate America, and I keep on thinking about this. I think the next time that I'm told by a corporate entity with which I'm associated to sit and take a diversity, equity, and inclusion training manual, I'm going to flat out say no, because it's a religion. I'm not going to sit here. You wouldn't expect me at a corporation to have my colleagues sit and hear the gospel of Jesus Christ.
Yes.
But yet I'm expected to sit and hear the gospel according to critical race theory or diversity, equity, and inclusion. My point is this.
Yes.
Is that, and this is the 30,000 foot level, we are engaged in this effort to erase Western civilization.
Yeah.
Remember this: citizenship matters. It was the Greeks, I think, 7th century BC, somewhere around there, where it was the Greeks who moved away from tribalism, away from the kin, the clan. That's where your allegiance went to this idea that we give our allegiance to something greater than ourselves, the state, the city-state, and a lot of this was because of property, because what was happening is that the governments or the elites were coming in and taking property, and they were like, well, wait a second, no. There has to be some rule in place where I can take this property and give it to my sons, or it stays in my family.
Sure.
So citizenship developed, and there were rights and responsibilities citizens had, and this, of course, started with the Greeks, extended to the Romans, and then ended up in Philadelphia in 1776. The idea of the ideal America. is an ideal based upon these rights, but also based on meritocracy.
Yeah.
The idea that we're not all equal in terms of I'm fat, you're skinny, your IQ is different than mine. I might have a disability that you don't have. I might have the gift of longevity. You might die early. The fact of the matter is no one in humankind, we're not equal.
Right.
But however, meritocracy makes up for that. It allows you to engage in the market where everyone is better off, but some people might be more better off than others.
Sure.
Right. And what we have is since the 1960s in Western civilization in Europe, Western Europe and in the Americas is this idea to undo this. And we see the effects in America where we have tribalism. America is largely, especially in blue states, is becoming tribal again. Right. We are going backwards, not forwards. What's the phrase I like to use? We are progressively advancing backwards.
You know,
and just to illustrate this in terms of the news. Remember, not long ago, there was this hot mic moment where Latino city council members in Los Angeles were lamenting that these Black people, that these gay people, that they were being represented on the council at a rate lower than their proportion in the population.
Right.
And they saw this, again, they saw this not as you're a citizen of Los Angeles, but rather you have an allegiance to your clan, to your kin. Yeah. This is where we're moving backwards to. And again, to bring it back to where we're going, the Chinese don't engage in this. The Iranian mullahs aren't engaged in this nonsense. The Russians aren't engaged in this nonsense. And this is why it's not just incompetence with the Biden administration. It is that they are focused on the wrong things. Progressivism, academia, corporate America, the Pentagon. The Pentagon cares more about transgendered Marines than they do about whether or not we are identifying spying objects in our airspace.
Marines, making sure that our jets are using renewable fuels, electric vehicles. But Jerry, it's interesting because one of the things I was scrambling, folks saw me put on my glasses. I pulled up. There was a great book, a classic book that came out a long time ago called "At Dawn We Slept," which is essentially an uncovering as to why this government missed Pearl Harbor in the days leading up to December 1941. And that's exactly it. We are distracted by these other things, focused on these again, social media and conformity and all of these things. We are so wound up in those things that we miss everything else. I want to add something to this again, because by the way, Jerry, I am gonna tease this out. Jerry and I, because I've mentioned this before, Jerry and I had been talking about the podcast and where the podcast stands at 50 episodes in, and we were at one point thinking about changing the name. Can I say this, Jerry? Or do you not want me to talk about this?
No, of course. Say it.
And so one of the things we were talking about was changing the name of the podcast to Thinking Out Loud. Thinking Out Loud with Andrew and Jerry, because that's essentially what we do. Because we have a conversation. And this is what we're supposed to do. We're supposed to pull on the threads so that we can discern some kind of conclusions about it. Jerry just said something really interesting, talking about trying to draw a line between ancient Rome and ancient Greece and ancient Rome, through to Magna Carta, which is where Jerry was going on the citizenship thing and property, to 1776 and the issue of meritocracy.
Right.
One of the things he was talking about, and what Jerry is alluding to, is the idea that we had in America. America was founded on the ideal that we had equality of opportunity, or it was an ideal, right? I'm not saying that it was that's the way it was. That's the way it was supposed to be. And in fact, from 1776 until, I will say, not just 1976, but let's say 1985, 1986, so 210 years, we were striving towards this idea of trying to create equality of opportunity. And then probably sometime around 1965, 66, with the implementation of Johnson's Great Society and the things leading up to that, the issue of equality of opportunity wasn't what people wanted anymore, right? They wanted something called equality of outcome. Now we can talk about
equity. It's in other words,
yes,
equity.
but equality of outcome and equity. Let me get to my point though.
Yeah.
Which is to say, it's Marxist ideology. It has its roots in Marxism. We've talked about this at length. But let me get to this point, Jerry. I'll fast forward to it. You're going to love this. When you are working to guarantee equality of outcome as opposed to equality of opportunity, you can manipulate the outcome. And you are, in effect, you are the ones picking winners and losers in a marketplace.
This is why, and you and I talk about this again all the time, where it's not hypocrisy, where you find California Governor Newsom at a restaurant when he has ordered restaurants closed, or he's wearing no mask, and he's 1 foot away from someone when he's ordered mask mandates and separation by 12 feet. That's not hypocrisy. It's hierarchy. You see, this is the thing.
That's exactly right.
Not only are they picking winners and losers, but they've insulated themselves from the consequences.
Right. If you gin it into the system, if you gin the picking of winners and losers into the system, then the folks who control the system can always win. Right. That's exactly it. And when you give government the opportunity or the ability to transfer huge sums of money from the public fisc into certain people's pockets, well, then certain people get their money, and that's where you get corruption.
And for the average American, COVID revealed this in a very real way.
Oh, and I got a good post-COVID story.
I mean, but the thing is that, but let's break it down. We talk about on this program too often Baltimore City, but Baltimore City, New York City, Philadelphia, Los Angeles, you have these progressive mayors, these progressive prosecutors, and that have created over the last several years really a dystopian city. Whereas just 5, 6, 7 years ago, America was still benefiting from this urban renaissance from the fixing broken windows revolution, the 90s into the 2000s. But today, cities have become really dystopian. We see a rise in violence, but largely, or almost totally, the elites are not feeling the impact. They live in gated communities. They have private security. Their children go to private schools. They don't have to engage in the market. They're not entrepreneurs. They don't have to make a payroll. So the impact of their progressive policies, of their DEI policies, has no impact on them.
I got two things, because I want to talk about Baltimore in a second, but I'm going to tell a quick story. I am trying to put together an event in advance of CPAC. And it's something that you and I have done in the past. And there's one restaurant right across the street that I've decided I would very much like to use. And I'm not going to give out the name of the restaurant, but it's right across the street from the Gaylord Hotel. And they are no longer, now this is a restaurant in Prince George's County in Maryland. So I blame Larry Hogan and I blame the Prince George's County executive. They are no longer, Jerry, this restaurant is not only no longer, as clear as I can tell, accepting reservations for private parties. They're not accepting reservations at all, which is bizarre. They're only taking guests on a first come, first serve basis. And I can only imagine it's because they are still reeling from the COVID policies that shut so many restaurants down. Let me ask you a question about Baltimore, because this gets into the press laziness and the stilted press and the issue. So story appears in the Baltimore Sun. The ethics complaints against the city council president, Nick Mosby, still are allowed to stand, right? And he has not been able to get them to be overturned. I find it very interesting that in the Baltimore Sun story, there is no mention, and I know you think that the charges against Marilyn Mosby are bullshit, and I'm inclined to agree with you. Sorry about that, Geraldine.
Marilyn Mosby, again, just for our listeners, has been charged with federal crimes that she misled her bank and lenders on claiming covert hardship,
paperwork violations.
Yeah, right. To get a mortgage, she lied on her paperwork.
Right.
Essentially.
But my point is, there is no mention, scant mention. I mean, are they still together? Are Marilyn and Nick Mosby still together? Do we know this? Because there's no mention as Nick Mosby is accused of improper activity with regards to his legal defense fund. There is zero mention in the Baltimore Sun article that Mosby's wife, the former prosecutor for the city of Baltimore, is also under federal investigation. Which is, it gets to this situation where this is how larcenies are allowed to continue, right? They have this power. There's no check on power. There's no diversity of ideas. And the press, which should be engaging in some kind of accountability, is no longer doing it. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Jerry.
Well, I'm amazed at the lack of holding elected officials accountable. It used to be, this was what a journalist wanted. They wanted to have their Bernstein,
Woodward and Bernstein
moment. And however, I think what happened, two things happened. There was the election of Barack Obama. And I remember, if you go back into 2008 and then, of course, into 2009, many mainstream journalists at CNN and again, we could Google these names, but very serious journalists began to admit, no, it's our responsibility now to make sure that the first Black man elected president is successful. And so even the veneer of objectivity went by the wayside. And then fast forward 8 years, we got in my mind, Trump is a carbon copy, the opposite side of the same coin as Barack Obama, narcissistic. And in terms of me, it's about me, not the party, about me, not the nation. Very similar, but regardless. So we had a journalist admitting that it was their duty, their obligation, their job to make sure that the Black president, the first Black president, was successful. Then when Trump's elected, they then admitted once again that it was their responsibility not to cover the issues fairly, but rather to subjectively, proactively go after Donald Trump. And so what happens now is we have, Andrew, we're talking about since 2009, we're talking about 13 years?
14
years of journalism telling us exactly what they're doing. And that is that they are rigging the game. It's not about accountability. This is why a child like Brandon Scott, the mayor of Baltimore City, I don't care what people think, Baltimore City, Philadelphia City, these are important centers of foreign America. These are important cities. Chicago, and what we see in Chicago, I mentioned to you before we started, O'Hare Airport has been taken over by the homeless. It's dystopian. You call the police, they refuse to help. That's Chicago.
San Francisco is throwing up its hands and dealing up with this problem. Now they want to legalize prostitution, and essentially, and they've said this, have drug tourism. Now I don't know if that's just weed or if it's weed and heroin and other things. But again, it's not. It's one of these situations. Yes, I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Real quick, because I mentioned Brandon Scott. Let me just finish on Brandon Scott, and that is, this is an individual who is. I don't think he's 40 years old yet. So this is a man elected. He's in his 30s, mid 30s, now in his late 30s, elected mayor of an important city. He has never done anything. He's not married. He's not a husband. He's not a father. He has no children. He's never started a business. He's never engaged in the private sector whatsoever. He's never held a private sector job. He's never served his country. He's never worked as a plumber's apprentice. He's literally done nothing, zero, nada, in his entire career, but be engaged in the Baltimore City politics,
political machine.
Right. And
he's 38, yet, by the way, Jerry.
He's 38 years old. And yet he's leading the city as someone who doesn't know how to lead. But yet the Baltimore Sun and myriad other media outlets refuse to hold him accountable. This is a problem, a crisis of journalism.
Let me explain to folks part of the reason why stuff like this offends me and Jerry. And I'm going to speak for you in a second. For you.
By the way, I'm a timeline of train derailments in just the past couple of weeks. There's been 8 trail.
There you go. Okay.
8.
Again, get into this. And isn't it interesting? 8 derailments at the same time. We've got chicken eggplants
Right.
to poultry plants catching on fire.
You want to go back to Brandon Scott, but just real quick on derailments, and we can get to it later. My father worked for 35 years for the New York City Transit Authority. A derailment was a major event where you would bring in the policing functions, the investigatory functions, the engineers, and this would be a everyone hands on deck. We can't even get the news to properly give us the information as to what's happening in Ohio. I didn't know about these other derailments.
I'm going to apologize to everybody, Jerry. I'm sorry if you hear the dog in the background. Of course, the landscapers have shown up outside the studio right now, and so my dog is, of course, going
no
crazy.
Worries. I noticed that when I listen to the Jordan Peterson podcast, I can hear his birds.
Good. Okay. Well, that's good to know. As long as I'm in good company here. Let's explain for a moment why stuff like this offends me and Jerry so much. Right, Jerry and I could talk about the politics till the cows come home. Jerry and I have both been involved in politics, right? Politics, I say, is the function by which we get people elected to office and sort of the machinations that go into getting votes done and things like that. But Jerry and I have also, more importantly, at least for me, I came to a realization a number of years ago. I got very tired of, and politics can be exhausting, that the policy stuff was so much more important to me, because policy is about solving problems. And you look at the things that are facing the electorate. Now, politics can be used to help solve those problems, right? The horse trading that goes in, the compromises that go into getting legislation done. But if you're patently uninterested in solving those problems, then what good is all of this stuff? This is Jerry. This is how we get into tribalism. Let me just give a quick example of something that really bothered me. A couple of years back, that Mayor Catherine Pugh, the former mayor of Baltimore, who was convicted on a host of corruption charges, one of the things that she was involved in was she owned a business with the, I think, similarly corrupt comptroller of the city of Baltimore. And one of the business, there was a boutique, and there were allegations that people were buying, in the same way that there are allegations that the art world is being used to launder money to influential figures. There's an allegation like that against Hunter Biden. That people were buying gift certificates, fake gift certificates to this boutique that they knew would never be redeemed.
Right.
And that was one of the ways that these two were lining their pockets. That's the allegation. And so I said, you know something, I've got a real problem with this. And it also came up with the Nick and Marilyn Mosby situation, where Marilyn Mosby was creating a travel business, right? A people of color oriented travel business. And I made the proposal because this is what I do. This is what Jerry and I do when we think about things. We think about, how do we solve these problems? Well, how about rule number one ought to be, if you are an elected city official in the city of Baltimore and you're making over X number of dollars, you can't have an outside business. It is presumed,
if you're making $250,000 a year.
Yes.
Marilyn Mosby was making $250,000 a year, and yet she still established one or two or three other businesses.
Right. And my point is that it is presumed, if you're making over X number of dollars, that role is your full-time job. Right? Something you and I have discussed in the context of other employment, Jerry. And I made this proposal to someone who was very well versed in, a colleague of ours, folks can figure out who it is, a colleague who's very well versed in Baltimore politics and politics in the city of Maryland. And he didn't like the idea for whatever reason. He said, no, it won't really solve anything, and it's unfair to the politicians and blah, blah, blah. I'm like, I don't care if it's unfair to the politicians. They take on a public trust when they run for office. In the same way, right? If you run for Congress, you're not supposed to have an outside business. You're not supposed to be making boatloads of money outside of this. So anyway, but it gets down to exactly what you're talking about, Jerry, the issue of elites and creating rules that exist for them and not for anybody else.
Yeah. And the bottom line is that it doesn't have to be this way. We don't have to have cities awash in crime. Look, 2 or 3 days ago in New York, a lunatic in a U-Haul decided to run into crowds of people, killing a father and injuring myriad others. We have a crazed gunman going to the University of Michigan and going into cafeteria and through school buildings and shooting up and murdering people. This is now, we had a woman, just a week or so ago, who strangled 3 of her own children. There is evil. And I mentioned these 3 because the woman who strangled her children, murdered her children, she arranged it so her husband would have to leave the house. She planned this. And when the husband left the house, she murdered her 7-year-old, her 5-year-old, and her 8-month-old.
Those stories are always
strangled them. I know.
Me.
And then, of course, just recently in New York, you have this lunatic driving through a crowd of people. And then you have just recently the gunman who this rampage at the University of Michigan. Here's my point. In every instance, there are signs. In every instance, there are mechanisms that should have been in place to deal with this. But we have now decided, like, for instance, this woman, it's gross. I see it on social media. Well, she was suffering from postpartum. Well, it's not her fault. She was on all of these medications. We have decided, our culture has decided not to blame the criminal. It's the gun. It's the mental illness. It is the big pharma. There's something or someone always. It's racism.
Right.
It's redlining. It's always something else. And we have to decide as a culture that, yes, there are these other circumstances that feed into the criminal justice system. I get it. But at the end of the day, if you murder your children, it's not the fault of big pharma. It's your fault. If you plow through a crowd of people and you murder someone, it's not because you're distraught and mentally ill. Or in the case of this shooter, why, Andrew? Why are we allowing the criminally violent, insane to wander our streets?
That's the real essence of the issue, Jerry. I mean, setting aside the issues of the Prozac Nation. By the way, and I believe the woman who wrote Prozac Nation killed herself. But setting aside that horrific crime, the issues of part of what we're talking about here is the failure of law enforcement to act, given the surrealistic nature that we've sort of circumstances that we've created. Right, the guy who was is now the accused shooter in Michigan. Right, he had no right to own a gun, no right to have a gun. He was convicted, right, and had it knocked back by a prosecutor. Hold on for a second. Yeah. Again, going back to so many of these mass shooting incidents, right? The Marjory Stoneman Douglas, of which we're now at the anniversary of, right now it's what, 5 years since Marjory Stoneman Douglas. That guy was on law enforcement's radar screen. The gunman down in Texas, there was a gunman down in Texas. I mean, all of these things, there is this failure again, because we've created this grasp of policy that makes no sense in the real world.
Right. And again, we could make this very simple, and that say is that we have decided as a culture not to hold people accountable. And it ranges, right? Look at the Baltimore City school system and its failure to keep its own kids safe. Well, a principal at Edmondson Westside High School, where a student was murdered during the day, his response was, well, there's nothing I can do. I can't. Yes, they're supposed to stay on campus, but I can't keep them on campus. So there's no accountability.
Right. There was this crime in Towson over the weekend, right? There was I don't remember if it was a shooting or what it was, but there are folks calling for the response of the government is, or the response of the left is, to say, okay, late night businesses, you have to come up with a crime prevention plan.
Well, in Baltimore, the same thing. This is not just, this is happening everywhere. And my point is that we have to hold people accountable. We have again, this is fairly recent. where criminal justice reform, when you and I used to talk about this before it became a popular issue, we were talking about, allowing prosecutors some discretion,
Right.
allowing judges discretion, that these rules like 3 strikes and you're out, we're not going to do anything in terms of crime, but rather harsh sentences, swift justice. This is what fair but harsh,
Right.
but also
Tough but fair.
Swiftness, though. These things mattered, but now criminal justice reform means that, well, we don't want to incarcerate. Look,
yes.
Look at the guns.
Well, I mean, yes, it is transformed into the most extreme and satirical view.
Eugene Robertson has a piece today in the Washington Post. It's entitled simply "Take Away the Guns." This is the mentality: take away the guns. However, when there's opportunity for progressive politicians to take away the guns, they refuse to do so. Case in point, in Maryland, we have a homicide crisis. Baltimore City is more dangerous than cartel-held cities in South America. That's how the homicide epidemic is. But still, Democrats in the state of Maryland will not charge if you are caught with an illegal firearm. It's a misdemeanor. A drunk driving offense in Maryland is a greater crime than having an illegal firearm. So they don't want the guns. They do not want to take away the guns because, unfortunately, for the progressives, in their mind, it means, well, we're going to have to put more black men in jail.
Right.
So therefore, they don't want to incarcerate. But when a tragedy happens, what they want to do is take away the guns, but who do they go after? They go after law-abiding citizens, and I challenge anyone.
Absolutely.
Show me the data on law-abiding citizens, legal gun owners, participating in any kind of high rate of crime in this country. It doesn't exist.
No. In fact, just the opposite, right? We know, at least the last statistics that I saw, 30,000 gun deaths a year, of which 20,000 of them were suicides, leaving 10,000 homicides, of which I want to say it was far less than 10. It was less than 1,000.
Minuscule. It's less
than 1,000 were committed with legally owned guns.
But my point is that they betray themselves. And again, I wonder sometimes, do they really want to solve the issues? You mentioned that many of these progressive policies, really the queer theory, critical race theory, identity politics, it's really a revised Marxism. But here's the thing. And we know this, and this is the wonderful thing about books and reading and history. We know that even the Marxists understand that Marxism doesn't work. They admitted such. They're going back to the 50s and 60s. There were committed Marxists who said, you know what? No, the system doesn't work.
Well, yeah.
And that sort of thing. We know that Marxism doesn't work. It has never worked anywhere. People say, well, look at China. Well, no, China decided in the 70s and 80s to take the Hong Kong model and allow for these so-called safe zones for enterprise. That's why China, why their economy grows, is because they've allowed for limited free enterprise in these so-called zones.
I don't want to have an argument with you about this, because I just literally this week's lunch hour with Federal Newswire, I have an extensive conversation with Gordon Chang about this. It really is just as simple, Jerry, as it comes down to the Chinese Communist Party steals the intellectual property of other people.
Right, yeah, of course, right.
Put it out.
But
it has nothing to do with,
but you can't,
with free enterprise zones. It's just,
I don't know. You can't say that Hong Kong wasn't an economic miracle.
No, Hong Kong was Hong Kong, but Hong Kong wasn't CCP. I mean, Hong Kong was Hong Kong. Hong Kong is
CCP today, and it's still Hong Kong.
Okay, but Hong Kong, because that's the agreement that they anyway. Sorry,
but I mean, I know you're right.
Yeah.
But regardless, again, even with the theft of IP, the fact is that without Hong Kong, look, I this is anecdotal, but when I coached football, I had a football player whose father was a member of the Communist Party in China, and he was the one of the richest men in China, and he owned the largest hotel chain in China. He was allowed to own hotels.
Yes,
and he was allowed to engage in commerce because of where he operated. But the point still,
right. At the time, China was operating under the model of state-sponsored capitalism.
Right. So the model, the point's still the same, though. Communism, Marxism has failed everywhere,
right.
From Cuba to China to the Soviet Union. But here's the thing: the Marxists, they don't care if it fails.
Right.
They just don't care because, in fact, they hope it's never fully implemented, because many of the Marxists, think of it, many of the Marxists, who are the Marxists today? Well, it's academia, it's Hollywood, it's the critical race theory people, it's the queer theory people, it's these progressives, it's equity politics. They don't want their system to be imposed because they are the elite, they are the wealthy. And so, but they want the issue. They want
it implemented the way it's been implemented throughout time immemorial, which is to couch it in whatever ideals, whatever flavor it is,
well,
whether or
not
let me
ask you this.
Well, hold on. Let me just finish my thought, Jerry.
Yeah.
Whether or not it's Marxist-Leninism, whether or not it's Stalinism,
right.
whether or not it's Castroism, Maoism, whatever, the bottom line is they know that in whatever flavor of
right.
Marxism they're implementing, the elites are protected. You
right.
have the nomenclatura, and you have the sort of the party darlings. Go ahead.
But in real Marxism, the elites would not be protected.
Of course not. No.
Right.
Yes.
So here's the question. The question is, does Eugene Robinson, the liberal columnist from the Washington Post, does Brandon Scott, does Barack Obama, you name the liberal leader, do they truly want to solve the crime issue?
No.
Or the housing issue or the public education crisis? Of course not.
No, because Rahm Emanuel, in a moment of honesty, said we never let the crisis go to waste. Yeah.
Right. And again, this is the disconnect where citizens believe that these politicians have their best interests. No, they don't. The politicians have self-interest, which is why my last point, which is why the failure of journalism is such a tragedy, because the journalists, the honest actors, could make plain the fact that these politicians
and let me now add to this, because we could go in all kinds of directions.
I know.
And boy, Lord knows, because one of the things I almost was going to mention was I had one of those interactions that Cameron Gray hates on Twitter.
You again with Twitter.
I know.
Stop talking about Twitter. We get in trouble.
Yes.
We get in trouble.
Yes, I'm gonna, but there's a conversation I want to have with you offline about this. You talk about the failure, and then we're going to add something else into the mix, which is the folks who are supposed to be the honest brokers in the think tank world, the policy world,
right? And
the bastardization they're in, and the uselessness they're in. And I sent Jerry a piece this morning. I am not going to throw this person under the bus.
No, I am. Because R Street.
You throw R Street. We can throw R Street under
R
the bus.
Street has a
piece about tech issues today, and more. Actually, it's not even about tech. It is written about Republicans and their oversight, the weaponization of government oversight committees, and essentially.
Which is the language of the left.
Well, wholeheartedly, and more to the point, embracing what the left. I mean, the first paragraph or second paragraph.
Where was R Street? Right, where was R Street pushing back against the J6 politicized committee?
Right,
I don't remember anything.
The point is that calling this, taking in whole hog the New York Times. By the way, I will say this: I suspect it is based upon the person, the entities that are funding this person's work. But I purposefully didn't say that to you offline or now, is because I don't like it when I'm accused of taking a position because I get energy money or pharma money, which I don't. Right, but Jerry, when someone comes out and says that that there is no problem, that there is no problem with. That there is a big problem with Republicans going and investigating whether or not free speech rights were violated on big tech platforms. When it's someone who's supposed to be on the right, I am immediately suspicious of that. And the point in the end is
But let me, I want to throw something at you.
Go ahead. Yeah.
But let me throw this at you because it's very interesting. Christopher Rufo, who's who's doing wonderful work at the Manhattan Institute
on education policy,
on education policy, on critical race theory, queer theory, on these issues. He gets pushback sometimes because what he says is that many of these theories, critical race theory, gender theory, queer theory, identity politics, they are allowed to thrive in the public sector setting, i.e., community colleges, public universities. And he said that they shouldn't be allowed to, that these are public entities, and therefore that the power of purse strings, the power of the power of politics, it should be used to push back. Now, I understand why a libertarian would say, wait a minute. Then what's going to happen at these public institutions will only be what is popular. And if you're doing some work that's controversial, well, you run the risk of losing your funding. To which Rufo responds, and that is, well, but your way is then to just cede the ground to the left. If you're not going to push back, if critical race theory is thriving in these public universities, and the right won't push back because, well, you shouldn't use purse strings or public monies to threaten the research. Well, then what's happening is you're giving up the entire field to the other side. And the bottom line is that this is the problem of the right. This is the David French problem.
Sure.
David French does not want to engage on transgender issues because he thinks in a pluralistic society, if you want to live this way, live that way, and I agree with him in theory, but in practice, what's happening is the transgender movement is pushing out of the public square the more traditional.
Right. It gets down to what we used to say. It used to be, if you wanted to be transgender and live your life that way, we have no problem with that. But now it's the concept of you will be made to care.
But this is where R Street gets it wrong. So R Street is saying that this committee is dangerous because it'll have the opposite impact on free speech and expression and such things. But what R Street is then doing is conceding or ceding the ground to only the left being able to politicize, only the left being able to stifle.
But also they are, I think, purposefully confusing the issue.
Oh yeah, well they're wrong. Yeah, they're wrong on the specifics.
This is my point. It's very simple and straightforward. It is inappropriate to use the power of government to silence your opponents in any way, shape, or form. It is not inappropriate to use the power of government to investigate those who are using the power of government to silence others. Right. That's the fundamental issue here. And so when you say that it's like, oh man, you can go back to examples of during the Clinton administration and the Clinton years, or more to the point. Actually, let me use a slightly different example. Folks who criticized attempts at regulatory reform because attempts at regulatory reform were necessitated the use of the Federal Register and the notice and comment rulemaking process in order to engage in regulatory reform. Well, I thought you were against burdening down the Federal Register with a whole bunch of new pages. You're adding pages to the Federal Register, which is, by the way, to me, a stupid metric of regulatory burden. But set that aside. The point is, you have to use the process of the Administrative Procedure Act and notice and comment rulemaking to go do. You have to use administrative executive orders in some cases to go down this road of doing these things. Anyway, sorry, go ahead.
When you have an administrative function at any level of government captured by the woke progressive agenda, it means tyranny for the rest of us.
Yeah.
And so the right has to become more comfortable in engaging in these public entities, in interventionist activities that the left has made perfect. We are all over the place on this, libertarians and conservatives, and then you have the R Street types. Once again, the left is better organized, better funded, and they know what they know, and they put their money where their mouth is. The right, we're debating this. You said that R Street piece to me, and I was outraged over it.
Right,
because it's regardless of the potential funding, they're doing it for funding. And again, I don't want to make that accusation because that's what the left does, but it's insidious.
It's wrong. It's wrong on any level, regardless of who might be paying for it or not paying for it. Hey, Jerry, unfortunately, we're running short on time here. When are you on WBAL next?
I am on WBAL Friday, February 17th.
Got it.
And then, of course, Sunday, every Sunday it's Jerry. Yeah. And again, I said this last week on the Jerry Rogers Show, WBAL News Radio. Go to WBAL, go to podcasts, and check Jerry Rogers. I know the Sunday show is 7 to 10, and some of you are at church, some of you might be sleeping. But the fact of the matter is, the podcast is there that you can enjoy it at any time of the day and any day of the week. If you also let me just give a pitch for this. We are going to, at Real Clear Policy now, we are going to be updating a podcast section where you can hear what we think are some of the most interesting conversations. And of course, Andrew and Jerry Save the World will be a feature there. In fact, Andrew and Jerry Save the World is featured there right now from last week's show. Look for this show where you look for it, Transistor, Apple, YouTube, etc., but also look for Andrew and Jerry at Real Clear Policy.
Please do. Hey, Jerry, listen, before we go, I do want to say this much. We had a conversation last week on the show in which we talked about one of our listeners, and I expressed some frustration in terms of how this listener contacted me and just sort of contacted me and Jerry and sort of got the same messages over and over again. It was part and parcel of the conversation where Jerry brought up the issue of accidentally logging into my Twitter account.
I did it again today, by the way.
Oh, there you go.
But I didn't tweet, though. I didn't tweet.
That's fine. So the point is,
in fact, before you say this, very important thing. So I have a piece this week at Real Clear Policy on Medicare Advantage.
Yeah.
On the president saying that Medicare cuts are off the table. So I write a piece that if this is true, Medicare Advantage, which is a Medicare Part C, it's Medicare, but delivered by the private sector. It is incredibly popular, efficient, cost-effective. Seniors love it. Yet the Biden administration is cutting it or threatened to cut it, which again breaks his promise not to cut Medicare. I have a piece on this at Real Clear Policy. This is my point. So I went to share it on Facebook, Andrew, and it says share to a page or to a page you have access to. And I did. And instead of going to the Jerry Rogers Show page, it went to the Andrew Langer Show page.
Oh, there you go. Well, you can always share stuff there, Jerry. You are very.
But you have something important to say.
My point is this: we have we have listeners that we consider, as Jerry and I have talked about, to be the inner circle. Folks who are the top level listeners.
Frankly, the type of listener that legitimizes why we.
Yeah, I just was expressing frustration in that I was getting messages from this person at a bunch of different pages, and when the people message Jerry, it pops up on my phone, which is fine. I feel badly that this person was upset by this, and I apologize for that.
This person should know that you're just a big old pain in the butt.
Well, that's very true. Yes, I have my curmudgeonly moments, as like anybody else. But we love this person's listenership and support. I am very sorry.
Well, I consider this guy a buddy. So
yeah, yes.
If he wants to stay angry with you, that's fine. With
that's me. Fine. That's certainly fine. Check out.
No, I'm joking. Andrew Langer is my best buddy.
I know.
I love this guy.
And I just called Jerry Honey, so we've been.
There is no better man. So there you go. And by the way, love. Happy Valentine's Day, belated.
Happy Valentine's to you as well. I actually reminded Jerry that yesterday was Valentine's Day as I was out running errands.
You did it right. I was joking. I knew it was Valentine's Day.
Right.
I had a nice.
I don't know.
At 7:30 this morning, I had a nice
yesterday
morning a basket and flowers and chocolates for my beautiful wife.
Oh, that's good. Very nice. Very nice. So So this week's lunch hour, Gordon Chang. Next week, and Jerry, this is
I love the lunch hour, by the way, and I'm looking forward to this conversation.
You'll look forward to next week's as well. Stephen Meyer from the Discovery Institute.
Yes, we talked about this.
We asked the question, what is the universe? Is there intelligent design of our universe and life on Earth? So go and check that out. Jerry, what do you want people to do?
Find the truth, plant your feet, and stand firm. God bless you.
Have a great week, everybody. Have fun, and please stay safe.